Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm the social media coordinator for Player Profiler and a senior analyst. My co-host is Chris Buonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm ready to talk about some wide receivers after a couple of weeks of talking about running backs. We're going to go over what I like to call ADP Whiplash, this constant cycle we do in fantasy football of undervaluing a player 1 year, so we overvalue him the next year, and vice versa. Before we get into some of our more whiplashy players, I did want to start with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk because they are pretty volatile values in fantasy football right now due to the uncertainty of the quarterback situation in San Francisco. But I believe there are pretty strong talent profiles here that are worth looking at, and their cost on underdog is something that I feel comfortable with.
Yeah, specifically with Deebo Samuel, let's start with the pros. He is top 20 in fantasy points per route run each season in his 4-year career. The con, of course, is that Deebo does not have the cleanest health in his history in the NFL. You go down to Player Profiler's injury history, you can say that his injury history is Skittles. Taste the rainbow, right? Look at all these different colors, specifically the red for the ankle and the hamstring. 3 times of straining the hamstring, and anytime you strain a muscle, it continues to become more problematic for players. Despite missing 17 career games, he has been inside the top 15 in yards after catch in each of his 4 seasons. 3 of those times he's been inside the top 10. The fact that he had a season where he played just 9 games and finished number 14 in yards after catch, Deebo Samuel, he's a baller. One of the other issues, though, is he is essentially a non-factor in air yard share. He's only cracked the top 60 once in his 4-year career. The concern people have is the hamstring strain, the ankle injury. These issues that continue to pop up for him that cost him games are going to affect his explosiveness. What happens when Deebo Samuel can no longer generate yards after the catch?
Yeah, it's certainly a player that is hard to rank because we've seen high-end fantasy football stat totals. He has a 300 total point season. This 2021 year was very absurd, but it was mostly on the ground. He did earn good receiving yards this year, but there was a lot of benefit to his circumstance. And now the way that Deebo Samuel scores points, there's a lot of overlap in this offense with Christian McCaffrey and a healthy Kittle. And then you look at his cost right now in Superflex, which this contest just wrapped up. He was wide receiver 16 in Best Ball Mania 4. The contest probably opens with him in a similar range, maybe wide receiver 18, wide receiver 19. I wouldn't be surprised if that contest opens with him behind Ridley and Cooper. And he does fall. This is one of the players that goes on the largest free falls in drafts. You'll often see him go a full round past ADP, sometimes more, especially in those single quarterback leagues. And it does make sense when you bring up the injury concerns and the receiving concerns, because you do see very good yards after the catch. You do see other efficiency metrics like juke rate being number 1 last year. But there is an issue with targets and target share, and there is a definite issue with air yards. Now, last season was another injury-riddled season for him. He had that later in the year high ankle sprain in week 14, and then he did play some later games, kind of so-so hurt, and then he played really well in the playoffs. Earlier in the season, he had a quad strain and those hamstring strains. It wasn't really a healthy Deebo year. He still put up 95 targets and 56 receptions, which isn't awful given the circumstance. So if we go back to 2021, though, he did get a very high target share, but not a lot of targets, kind of a symptom of the offense. Very low in that air yard share, very low in that ADOT, and not a lot of deep targets. You do see good receiving yards, good yards after the catch. You go back to efficiency, his yards per route run, his yards per target, yards per reception. This is a guy who has explosive efficiency in him, but in the 4 years he's played, we haven't seen him be a dominant downfield receiver. Now, can we say he definitively is not one? I don't think so, because just watching the sport, it's very obvious he hasn't been asked to do this. At no point has he really been given the opportunity to play with a quarterback or in a scheme that relies on a downfield receiver. My bigger concern for Deebo wouldn't necessarily be his talent. It would be the talent of his fieldmate, Brandon Aiyuk, who has shown us now through multiple years that he is a good downfield receiver in ways that Deebo Samuel hasn't shown us.
Deebo Samuel is the better fantasy football weapon, but Brandon Aiyuk is the more complete wide receiver. Both guys are yards after the catch machines. What separates Aiyuk is he was number 14 in win rate versus man coverage and number 27 in routes run versus man coverage. What that's telling you is this is the alpha receiver. This is a receiver that can win against cornerbacks. Aiyuk brings a combination of air yards, where he was number 30 this past season, and yards after catch. While it was not as impressive as Deebo, was still number 17 in the NFL. Aiyuk also has the better profile than Deebo. They're both very impressive profiles. Aiyuk is about the same size. He's a little lighter, but he has longer arms. He's got more burst. The breakout age, though, 21 and a half is super low. The thing that people need to learn is when you look at player profile and there's something that doesn't seem right or something that's way off, ask the question why. I personally was off Brandon Aiyuk because the breakout age was super low. When he got drafted in the first round, I said, I need to revisit this. The Breakout Finder app was high on Brandon Aiyuk too. You use the power of Google to find out what's the deal with Brandon Aiyuk. He went the junior college route before going to Arizona State. All right, so he was a late bloomer. Not the case at all. Coming out of high school, he was offered a scholarship from Alabama, but he couldn't attend because he didn't have the grades, which is why he went to JUCO and then transferred to Arizona State. And that's why he's got the late breakout age. If he went to Alabama, here are the wide receivers from 2016 to 2019 that he would have competed against or potentially competed against. Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. All those guys drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. The fact that Aiyuk was also drafted in the first round, he has talent. He's the better profile than Deebo Samuel. He is the reason you should be concerned about drafting Deebo Samuel.
He's a very good player, even in his rookie year, number 18 in PPR points per game. People were very excited about the sophomore year, and it seems like he falls off this year. But in reality, if people remember, for whatever reason, he entered the season in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse. He just didn't play these first 6-7 games. It was the most bizarre thing. And then when he came back, he was great. Coming into this year, he gets to be a full-time player again. And you can argue this was kind of a best-case scenario because the first half of the season, there was no CMC, and Elijah Mitchell was hurt a lot, and then Deebo Samuel spends a lot of time banged up. So Aiyuk got a lot of opportunity to be the player that he can be. 23rd in target share, 37th in target rate, number 11 in snap share. He's on the field a lot. He's participating in routes, number 14th. So when routes are being run, he is on the field running them. Now 30th in air yards, but 16th in air yard share. The A-dot's not the best, but this team doesn't throw deep. So you keep scrolling down, and in the actual receiving efficiency metrics, he has numbers that Deebo doesn't have. Now, they're not necessarily elite, but number 24th in yards per route run, number 22nd in yards per target, 41st in yards per reception, which given the offense is good. He's doing well, third in target separation. So he is a good player. I don't think it's enough to say Aiyuk is on the field, so let's not draft Deebo. But when we start to look at price, what I would say for Deebo is I don't want to be reaching on him, and I'm not necessarily pushing the button at cost. But if you're in a scenario where Deebo starts to fall past ADP and it's around past ADP and he's still there, I wouldn't hesitate on drafting him when he falls because he does still have a massive upside. Aiyuk, on the other hand, at wide receiver 32, that's just an easy buy. I'm not saying you have to target him or go out of your way or buy him every time because he's around other talented players that have a similar argument. You can kind of just take any of Lockett, Aiyuk, Godwin, Marquise Brown, and Mike Evans in this range. Again, both of these guys, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable at their price. If they ever slip past their price, it's just a bargain.
Well, from the San Francisco 49ers receiver duo, we'll keep it within the division. We've got DK Metcalf. Chris, what can you tell me about DK Metcalf?
I would say anyone listening should put on a neck brace because we're about to suffer a serious case of whiplash. So what's happening with DK Metcalf is that last season, everyone was down on Seattle. Oh, Geno Smith can't play quarterback. It's probably going to be Drew Lock. This team's going to fall apart without Russell Wilson. And we shoved DK Metcalf to the 5th round of best ball drafts, sometimes the 6th round. And he outperformed that draft slot by a lot. He scored 181 points, and it smashed his ADP. So now, because we all missed on Metcalf last year, it's the whiplash. Now we have to shove him up. He's wide receiver 15. And the problem with DK Metcalf is he's not good enough to say he's definitively top 15. It's now an overcorrection of ADP whiplash where we undervalued him last year. Now we're overvaluing him because the value over replacement is not very good. In a conventional non-best ball draft, your question is always how much value is the player I'm drafting giving me over players available on the waiver wire? In best ball, your value over replacement argument becomes how much value is this player giving me compared to players 5, 6, 7 rounds later. DK Metcalf, the last 2 years via underdog scoring, hovers around 200 fantasy points, right? Amari Cooper, 200 fantasy points. You keep going down the list. Jerry Jeudy last year put up 170. He could take a step up. Christian Kirk, 200 fantasy points. Tyler Lockett, 195 fantasy points. Chris Godwin even managed 170 last year off the ACL. And the man we just talked about, Brandon Aiyuk, 188 fantasy points. These guys are significantly cheaper. You get them 3-4 rounds later, and that's just looking at scoring totals. So now we look at efficiency metrics. DK Metcalf's a very fine player. 6'3", 228, godly athleticism, good draft capital. You look at his scoring, top 24 in PPR points per game every year. He has this very high efficiency sophomore year, where sophomore and junior years, same amount of targets, just happens to do massively more with it in 2020. That's just an efficiency spike year. His yards per reception probably are more than what we saw the last 2 years. Probably closer to this 15 is what his career average will be. But you look at his efficiency, let's just look at 2021 and 2020 before Geno Smith. So 2020, even in his best year, you're getting good targets, not that incredible of a target share. Number 19 is good, but top 15 player, I question it. You go down to the air yards and air yard share are great. The yards after catch, number 17, are just okay for someone who's getting number 2 in air yards and 129 targets. The average target distance is fine. So now you go to 2021, you see a big dip in yards after catch. You see a dip in average target distance. You go to the efficiency metrics, a dip in yards per route run, a dip in yards per target, a dip in yards per reception. We look back to last year and we see the same. Less yards after catch, your efficiency metrics are all less than that career year. Now, I'm not in any way saying that DK Metcalf is a bad player, but we know what this player is. This is not a well-rounded, can do everything, jack of all trades, Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill. This is a guy who on 4 to 5 types of routes absolutely excels because you physically can't stop him. He is the Derrick Henry of wide receivers. When Derrick Henry gets handed the football, when he's on the field, everyone on the field knows it's a run play, and it does not matter. Derrick Henry is going to run right over you. When DK Metcalf runs certain routes that he's great at, the corner on the other side of the field knows exactly where DK Metcalf is going. Everyone on the field, the safeties, the coaches, the fans, everyone. Doesn't matter. He's going to catch it, but he's limited. So when you look at the cost, it's whiplash. Does he deserve to be higher than where we drafted him last year? Of course. But wide receiver 15, that's a little handsome. He should be more like wide receiver 20, wide receiver 21. And especially in single quarterback leagues, to take him at the 2-3 turn is very high. I would say 3-4 turn or somewhere in the 4th round is where he should settle. Where last year he was a 5th or 6th round pick. It's an overcorrection, and the problem is his ADP compared to Deebo Samuel is much more sticky. He's a player that doesn't really slide past ADP because everyone's feeling the FOMO.
Nothing has changed with Metcalf. He essentially did the same thing this past season with Geno Smith that he did the year before with Russell Wilson. It's just people go, oh, Geno Smith is better than what we thought. Nothing's changed. Metcalf is the same exact player in 2022 as he was in 2021, and he'll be in 2023. Don't reach, don't overcorrect. We were too low on him last year collectively as a community. This year, we've swung too far the other way.
If Geno takes a slight step back to his average, everyone comes down with him. DK Metcalf is one of the players that I've drafted the least up to this point, and one of the players I'm drafting much more is Mike Evans. Mike Evans is on the opposite end of the spectrum. Mike Evans has been buried. Mike Evans is wide receiver 36. That is disrespectful for a multitude of reasons. You don't even have to look at Mike Evans' efficiency metrics. The conversation starts and ends with Mike Evans is an ungodly player. And just look at these PPR points per game in his career. wide receiver 14, wide receiver 25, 3, 19, 10, 5, 16, 10, 13. Targets, always over 100, most of the time over 120. Always receptions, 1,000-yard seasons. The man does not go for less than 1,000 yards. Always above 14 yards per reception. Sometimes flirts with 17. Always crushing air yards. Always finding the end zone. He's going to be 30 when the season starts. People are acting like he's 33 years old or he had a dip in efficiency last year. There's been no dip. He dipped in touchdowns because the offense dipped. Baker Mayfield couldn't possibly be worse than what 45-year-old Tom Brady was last year. Tom Brady's style of game is the worst case scenario for a Mike Evans. He was throwing the ball within 2.5 seconds. He refused to get sacked. The offense was stagnant. Safeties were giving a lot of cushion. And Mike Evans wants to play down the field. And he still managed the 1,000 yards to 14.6 yards per reception with a Tom Brady who did not want to hold the ball and throw it down the field on an offense that struggled. You look at the efficiency, he's not a yards after catch guy, never has been. The A-dot's great. Target share, he's never been a high target share, but always gets the targets. Air yards share, air yards are great. Routes run is good. You look at deeper efficiency metrics, yards per reception is still good. Everything is still generally top 30 yards per route run. But if you go back to his spikes in his career, you're not necessarily getting crazy efficiency out of Mike Evans. It's just never who he was. Well, look at 2019. It was a great year for Mike Evans. 23.8% target share. I mean, it's not super high. It's never been who he is. You're still not getting super high route participation, but you're still getting crazy air yards share, crazy target distance, no yards after the catch, but every deep target, all the red zone targets. The efficiency doesn't really jump off the page. None of this matters. The man is undeniable. The worst we've seen from him is wide receiver 25 in points per game. He is wide receiver 36. You just don't have to question it. When Mike Evans is there and you need a receiver, just draft Mike Evans. Is he going to finish top 12 this year? No. Is he going to finish top 15? Probably not. Is anyone surprised when he's the wide receiver 21 in PPR points per game in his age 30 season? No one should be. And if he finishes as wide receiver 21 through 25 and you're drafting him as wide receiver 36, that's a fantastic pick. I don't care about the quarterback situation. I don't care about the teammates. I don't care about anything else. This player is amazing. DK Metcalf goes up, we fade him. Mike Evans goes down, we buy him. This time next year when DK Metcalf goes down, we buy him. It's not a hard game to play here. And Mike Evans is the reason why it's not hard at all. People just don't want to draft him because he didn't live up to his second round pick last year. If Mike Evans was a fourth round pick last year, his 186 fantasy points are amazing. Because he was a second round pick, his 186 fantasy points are disgusting. He's a great player. I'm not overthinking it.
Last season, Mike Evans, week 4, went for over 30 PPR fantasy points. In week 17, went for nearly 50 fantasy points in PPR leagues. You're not drafting anyone around Mike Evans' ADP that can put up that type of upside there. I don't care that he had all these quiet games. The only thing that he couldn't do last season was he didn't find his normal double-digit touchdowns. He only finished with 6. That's literally all we can say about, this bad season for Mike Evans. The receptions, the yards, they're right where they needed to be. The yards per reception is what it's been the past 3 seasons. He just didn't score 13 and 14 receiving touchdowns. He only scored 6 and still finished with 15 fantasy points. Mike Evans is good. Mike Evans should not be going at wide receiver 36.
There's no reason to fade Mike Evans. The only reason you're not drafting Mike Evans is because you already drafted Chris Godwin 5 spots of ADP earlier. But that's the only reason. Our last duo we're going to talk about today, and this is the one that's going to probably upset some people. Last week, we upset some people with Bijan Robinson, and today I'm going to upset some people with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But first, in order to get to Amon-Ra, we have to talk about Diontae Johnson. Drafted 2 slots after Mike Evans, and truly the last wide receiver of the first 38 where there's a tier break, and he's the last guy similar to Mike Evans where you just go with it because of what we've seen, and it just makes sense. I want to compare him to Amon-Ra St. Brown because it's a little more similar than people are going to be comfortable thinking about. Diontae Johnson's wide receiver 38 right now on Underdog. That is his absolute floor. Same as Mike Evans. Get him at a healthy exposure. He's a guy that's going to help you advance, but you do have to keep in mind it is the Steelers and he is a low ADOT player, so he probably doesn't actually help you in the DFS weeks, but he helps you advance and he's cheap. In most of my teams with Diontae Johnson, he's my 4th receiver. He's my 5th receiver. If he's your 2nd receiver, you probably have a problem. But if he's your fourth receiver, that's exactly what you want in a fourth receiver. Smaller guy, not super athletic. He's everyone's hopes and dreams for this year's rookie receiver class of small non-athletes. You look at the career production, we forgive the rookie season. Wide receiver 22, 8, and 39 in PPR points per game. That's 39 last year without scoring a single touchdown. That's where he's being drafted right now. Absolute floor. It doesn't get worse than last season. The Steelers only go up from there. The one argument for Diontae Johnson, which is the same argument for buying Amon-Ra last year, is you can't argue the target shares and the targets. So at a certain point, if a player's earning targets at this rate, I don't care about stats, I don't care about metrics, he's doing something right. Last season, my most owned player in best ball was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was a 6th to 7th round pick, and a lot of people buried him because nobody liked Jared Goff. Goff was the QB 30, and that whole Lions offense got smothered except for DeAndre Swift. So because nobody liked Jared Goff, nobody liked Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the case for Amon-Ra St. Brown was plain and simple. I don't remember the exact number. It was something like the last 9 games or the last 8 games. He earned a 30% target share in every single game. In order to do that makes you an incredibly unbelievable player. He kept that streak going. I think the streak was something like 14 total games when you look at the end of his rookie into the start of his sophomore season for games in a row with 30+% target share. That is a very impressive number. That is a number indicative of your talent. In the 6th or 7th round, you just draft that guy. You don't think twice about it. You just draft that guy because he's doing it. And that's always been Diontae Johnson. And now he's far cheaper than Amon-Ra was last year, and he's done it for 3 years in a row. 6th in targets, 27% target share this last season, 2021. 28.5% target share, 2nd in targets. 2020, 22.9% target share, 6th in targets. Let's look at his average year. Wide receiver 22 is probably his average finish. This wide receiver 8 is an outlier. That's higher than his actual value. This is not a wide receiver 1 in the NFL or in fantasy football. This is a back-end wide receiver 2. So you look at his efficiency metrics on an average year. Target share is good. You look at everything else though. Yards after catch is just okay, but the ADOT is awful. Very few deep targets. And then you look at the efficiency metrics, nothing to hang your hat on. You look at that 2021 year and target share is much better. Still poor ADOT. He has more deep targets, but 24 deep targets on 169 targets, not very impressive. Yards after catch is still very good though. Efficiency metrics, nothing that jumps off the page. Okay in yards per team pass attempt, okay in yards per route run. And it's more of the same last year. You see yards after catch dips, but wasn't a great year. Not a lot of deep targets on a lot of targets. Not very efficient. Long story short, Diontae Johnson is a comfortable draft at his ADP. Now you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. Is Amon-Ra St. Brown worth wide receiver 10 in non-super flex, a mid to early 2nd round pick who often goes before Saquon Barkley, before Jonathan Taylor, before Tony Pollard, before stud running backs? Some people take him before Jalen Waddle. It's very expensive. We're basically saying that Amon-Ra St. Brown has already made it. He's a definitive alpha. Now he's very good. One of my favorite players from last year, and I've always hated Diontae Johnson. It hurts me to prop up a guy I dislike like Johnson and to not be hot on Amon-Ra. But when you look at the efficiency, we're going to look at both years. Last year, great target share, great targets, great target rate. ADOT is terrible. No deep targets. Yards after catch is good. It looks very similar. Now, in Amon-Ra's defense, he does have the efficiency metrics that Diontae didn't in yards per route run and the formation adjusted yards per route run and the juke rate. But for me, it could just be an efficiency variance here. The other boost to Amon-Ra is the rookie season. He earned over the 20% target share, and this number is skewed from those first 6 games. He did better as a rookie than Diontae did, and he's bigger. 5'11", 197, more athletic. You look at Diontae, 5'10", 183, not athletic at all. So I don't think it's fair to call Amon-Ra St. Brown Diontae Johnson. But now can we call him a definitive stud? The player I think of is Michael Thomas. Thomas is known for being slant boy. Can Amon-Ra be that lower ADOT guy that still dominates the offense and gives you these top-end wide receiver finishes? So you look at Michael Thomas's PPR points per game, 7, 4, 6, 1 when he's healthy and in his prime. That's a high-end wide receiver 1. When we already established Diontae Johnson is a low-end wide receiver 2, Michael Thomas is much bigger than both Amon-Ra and Diontae. 6'3", 212. Size-adjusted athleticism is nice. So look at 2018. Targets are great. Target share is great. Average target distance. Good yards after the catch. These efficiency metrics are good, but nothing really much better. These three profiles actually all look fairly similar. When you look at efficiency, target share, yak, ADOT, a lot of similarities with these guys. Michael Thomas crushes fantasy. Diontae Johnson is boring, but floats fantasy. And Amon-Ra St. Brown last season was number 10 in fantasy points per game. Now, a lot of things went right for Amon-Ra. The situation is not as sticky as people might want to think it is. So considering that it's still too early to definitively say Amon-Ra is amazing, I think that a safe assumption would be if Michael Thomas is a high-end wide receiver 1, Diontae Johnson's a low-end wide receiver 2, then it's not unreasonable to have Amon-Ra as a back-end wide receiver 1 or high-end wide receiver 2. I'm not going to say that his price is awful. It's a bit of ADP whiplash where people missed him last year, so now they're propping it up. I think you can argue Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, some of these guys after him are more talented. The problem with St. Brown, his ADP, like Metcalf, is very sticky. He rarely falls past ADP. A lot of times people reach on him because of the whiplash factor. It's just not a player that I've drafted as much because I want him to fall a few slots. And it's not even necessarily among receivers where I'm uncomfortable. It's cross-positionally. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I much more prefer the upside of a Nick Chubb. And yes, we have Bijan and Taylor with higher ADPs and Saquon with a higher ADP, but these guys do slide. If you look at a lot of draft boards, you'll find Amon-Ra going before Lamb sometimes, before Barkley, before Eckler sometimes. This is not a player to prop any further up. This is a player who right now is at his ceiling, and if anything, we look for him to fall down because he is one of these candidates to disappoint that second round ADP. I don't think we can say for sure that he's more than what Diontae Johnson's given us. One more player I want to look at is Jarvis Landry. So Jarvis Landry is this guy that for his whole fantasy career is giving you really good production as a wide receiver 2. He always earned high target shares. He always had good fantasy finishes. The same thing, high target share, low ADOT player, so touchdowns. And his production, I see Diontae Johnson a lot like I see Jarvis Landry. It's back end wide receiver 2. He has that one wide receiver 4 year. Diontae Johnson has the one wide receiver 8 year. Amon-Ra St. Brown has the wide receiver 10 year, but the rest is wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 25 and a few dips into the 30s. And then you look at his efficiency. We'll look at 2019, where he finished wide receiver 21. Same profile. Lots of targets, high target share, terrible ADOT, no deep targets, great yards after the catch, and nothing to hang your hat on in the efficiency metrics. It's the same profile. It's a player that defies an efficiency breakdown, has a role in the real NFL, and where do they land? So if Diontae Johnson is similar to Jarvis Landry, where he's a back-end wide receiver 2, in the years when he's cheap, he's a buy. He's cheap this year. If he goes up in price next year and he's top 20, he's a sell or a fade. And Amon-Ra right now, you can't definitively say he is above these guys. The rookie season target share is nice and the better athleticism has me propping him up, but I don't think he's Michael Thomas, and I think you should be a little skeptical with him as wide receiver 10.
All the things that we stack against Diontae Johnson and why we push him down to almost outside the top 40 wide receivers, we turn a blind eye and we don't do the same for Amon-Ra and ask the same questions. Is Jared Goff going to be a quarterback that goes out and throws for almost 4,500 yards and 29 touchdowns in 2023? Or is he going to be the quarterback that he has been the last few seasons where he hasn't topped 4,000 passing yards and barely gets 20 passing touchdowns? And guess what? If he reverts back to that, that's going to affect Amon-Ra St. Brown. Stop fading Diontae Johnson. And with Amon-Ra, he could still be great, but you do have to pump the brakes with Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, we need another season to really evaluate Amon-Ra, and wide receiver 10 is making the assumption that he's already definitively better than the Diontae Johnsons and Jarvis Landrys, who are similar style players. We don't know that for sure. Michael Thomas is an exception, and he was much bigger. That size matters. Pump the brakes on Amon-Ra, but don't entirely fade him. He's still okay to draft sometimes. Fade Metcalf, he's overpriced. Mike Evans and Diontae Johnson are at their absolute floors. Just buy them. Brandon Aiyuk is a comfortable purchase, but not someone who I'm going out of my way to draft. But if he's there, he's there. same with Deebo. Deebo and Brandon are comfortable. Evans and Diontae are cheap. And Metcalf and St. Brown are a little too pricey.
This is going to conclude this episode of Statmasters. But if you're listening on YouTube, we want to make sure that you join our Discord server. You can go to playerprofiler.com/chat to join the Discord server. Why would you join our Discord server? Because our audience that is listening to this live as we record is going to get bonus content. If you like this video, make sure that you hit the like on the YouTube video, you subscribe if you're not already, and then join our Discord server. That's playerprofiler.com/chat to join the Player Profiler Discord server. And from Aaron and Chris, we bid you adieu until next time.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.